My name is Jenni Le Forestier, and I am the Dufferin Caledon Green Party candidate in the federal election for 2021. I am a music teacher and a mom. I've lived in Dufferin Caledon for about 10 years, and I've been a very strong advocate for West Caledon usually, but most recently more of Dufferin Caledon. I'm a member of Gravel Watch, very concerned about our headwaters and maintaining the integrity of our biosphere.
The first thing we want to ask you about is electoral reform and how the Green Party platform fits in on a national scale and what your personal views are on that. And there's been a lot of thought about this recently with the US election and the Electoral College and the whole first past the post system that works. And does that really represent the population and the diversity and the needs of the population? So what is the Green Party platform on electoral reform, and what are your personal views?
So the Green Party definitely advocates for proportional representation. We were very strong recommending that in the last election and the last election before that, and I believe the election before that. So it's been a long-standing issue. It's very disappointing that one of the promises made by Justin Trudeau was to have electoral reform by the next federal election, and of course that hasn't happened. I think what we're seeing is a failure to really represent all of the various different groups in Canada. We're having the same results. Usually it's two parties, and sometimes you're lucky you get an independent or a few Greens, but we really need to shake things up, because I feel that is how we will start to get some actual action on the issues that are really the most dire of our time, namely being the climate emergency and also housing and affordability. We're just not getting anywhere when we keep having the same two-line parties represent the whole of Canada every single election.
So why should people, particularly in a very conservative riding who might be leaning left, vote Green when there's a good chance that Liberal will take a significant portion of that?
So I feel like strategic voting has not worked in the past. I myself have fallen into that trap of looking at what the predictions are in the polls and then trying to vote strategically, only to be completely disappointed and not have my vote reflected in any way. So for this election, we're calling on people to vote with their conscience and with their heart. In a conservative riding, it's that has so much to lose environmentally, but also for small businesses, for people that have been disenfranchised, for people that have fallen through the cracks during the pandemic that did not get financial assistance. It's time that we look at the Green Party platform as something that can actually make a difference for the people in Dufferin Caledon when it comes to pharmacare, when it comes to affordability and housing. That is not going to be represented in the Conservative platform. What I've heard at the door, people are very upset that the election has been called, but they're also not satisfied with the representation we've had so far. They do want to see a change. They're afraid to, go to the Green vote because they feel like it won't be reflected. Again, this goes back to proportional representation.
Right.
But my answer to that is, if you want to see action in the House, vote Green, because we're very good at pushing from behind to make change. And if we want to be change makers, we actually have to change our vote.
So we're going to talk about issues on Indigenous reserves and Indigenous water access, which I know is a big point, well, for every main party, but particularly for the Greens and how they would approach this. So in 2015, Justin Trudeau campaigned on a promise of fixing the nation's drinking water crisis for Indigenous people. However, in 2020, the government has far from delivered, and the Indigenous Service Minister has remarked that there is no credible excuse for these conditions. So how would a Green government ensure that this issue is finally resolved across more than 630 Indigenous communities in Canada?
So it's unconscionable to me that in 2021 we still have boil water advisories happening in this country. There's no excuse for that with Canada's freshwater resources that we have available. So that needs to be addressed. It needed to be addressed 10 years ago, and it's still not been addressed. So for the Green Party, that's a key primary concern that needs to be fixed. When it comes to Indigenous, issues, housing is another one. We have a housing strategy that needs to also address Indigenous housing, especially in urban areas. We have concerns with healthcare. We have concerns with education. Indigenous youth should be able to learn their language. They should have access to the schools to do so. There's a real disparity. Even in this riding, I've met several young women talking to me about housing, and they're having to move from a house that has an $1,800 a month rent to suddenly $3,000 a month rent, and their kids are being called back from university to help pay. It's really awful, actually, that we have this situation today. I was concerned at the local debate just this past week that there was no land acknowledgement made before the debate started. So I had done one, so I did it. But, that should be just inherent in local councils. Every meeting there should be a land acknowledgement. We have to start walking the walk, and do better. And a lot of things, but just those are the basics that I think need to start happening in this riding.
Absolutely. And you already touched on this, but we're going to continue with this theme in that Indigenous people have long experienced lack of representation and lack of government support and action on issues that particularly affect them, even though they've been here obviously the longest. So how does your party plan to implement reconciliation into the community? Some of these might be access to housing, traditional rights, water, education, all of those issues.
Yeah, all of those issues. They should have access to everything we do. There should not be a disparity at all. And they should feel welcome to do so. I've had the pleasure of speaking with Nancy Rowe, who is the hereditary chief of the Mississaugas of the First Nations. And one of the things that she talked to me about was access to the West Credit River. And something so basic as having children feel that they can go and play in the river and not be targeted by people who may be landowners there, or not targeted by police questioning them on what they're doing. She was 46 before she dipped her toes in the West Credit River and felt safe to do so. That stuff needs to change. We need to do better for our First Nations, even locally. We have a situation, it's now been 1,000 days that Land Back 1492 has been pushing back against the subdivision in the Haldeman Tract, and they've been doing it successfully. They had a call out this summer for water to be delivered because they didn't have access to it. This is Canada, and we're not doing very well when it comes to our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and I feel like there's a sense that we had the absolute devastating summer and we're still finding bodies in residential schools, and no one's talking about the numbers that keep going up. It was front page news for about 2 weeks, and the number has climbed, and it's no longer on the front page. I haven't heard any local candidates talking about Indigenous issues, not once. Doesn't mean they haven't done it, but it hasn't been front page.
Right.
So I think we can do a lot better.
Mm-hmm. And a specific issue during the spring and over the summer as well has been Indigenous communities directly standing in opposition to fossil fuel infrastructure and development, particularly with the pipeline on their Indigenous land that they've inherited, and encounters with the police. And this has created a division within, especially the Liberal government and power of what a government is to do when they've implemented laws that seem to oppose their platform, and they're directing a police force that has the ability to make either real progress or real damage to a community. So how does the Green Party stand on these issues of these clashes with Indigenous and police, and how would the government manage this conflict, I suppose?
I don't think the government has managed this conflict. I think from even 2 years before the pandemic started, there were clashes, and it was the police would show up, and there was a sense that these people were inconvenient, getting in the way of regular business, rather than acknowledging that they had an inherent right to stand up against the TMX pipeline. I think we know that Indigenous groups are far better at conservation and far better at land stewardship. And so if we're truly looking at truth and reconciliation, then we actually have to engage with them and do it in a peaceful manner, and learn from what they're trying to tell us, which is that there's a finite amount of resources. And if we want to address the climate emergency, then you leave it in the ground. Fairy Creek has just been an absolute horror show to watch this summer. RCMP, while I respect the officers and I have friends that are RCMP, the way it's been handled has just been way too aggressive. It's not acknowledging that these are human beings with a right to object, with a right to say that old growth forests are sacred, and that there's no excuse really at this day and age to be cutting down those old growth forests. There's definitely no excuse to be pepper spraying youth. There's definitely no excuse to be restricting access to journalists who are trying to cover what's happening. Again, is this Canada? I don't recognize it, and I think we need to get back to appreciating our old growth forests, our young people who are trying to do the right thing, their right to protest, and the fact that the pipeline needs to be canceled. And the Green Party is very clear on that. There should be no fracking. There should be no new pipelines. There should be no subsidies of pipelines. It's a dying industry. And so why are we still pumping in money to keep a dying industry afloat? That money should be diverted into much better resources like renewable energy and other projects like pharmacare and livable guaranteed income. There's far better ways to use $70 billion that I can think of than a pipeline.
We've just been talking about how some of the European nations are well exceeding us in all of their climate goals, as well as goals around renewable energy and electric vehicles and things like this. Another area that many Nordic countries surpass us in is education, especially for higher level education and university students. Norway, for example, offers free university tuition for the majority of their students. And many have raised the question, is this a direction that Canada could go? So what is the Green Party platform on education in general, and specifically higher level education, where student debt prices are now far exceeding any levels that have been reached before?
It's very clear we need to have free university and colleges for students. That is a Green Party value and platform, and I fully agree. France as well has free university, and I think, we're falling behind on some of the basics. So higher level learning is key now. I mean, whether it's university or college, or even if it's apprenticeship, there's no question that you need to have more in your toolbox than just a high school diploma. So if we're trying to have a strong economy, a viable economy, a vibrant economy, we need to support young people who are trying to get skills, who are trying to decide what they might like to pursue, and you can only do that through university education or college education, and it definitely should be free. It should be an incentive for governments to get these kids to the schools of their choice. They should have options, and I think that's something that we should have done a long time ago, but we definitely need to do it now.
Wonderful.
Currently, Canada employs a mixed national carbon tax system along with a cap and trade system for other industries. Do you believe that the current method implemented by the Trudeau government 2019 and onward is the most effective method? Would you just alter the goals in that, or do you think there's other strategies that are overdue?
I think there's some other strategies, and I think the Green Party has a good platform for that, which is basically charging at the border emissions that would come into Canada. I think we're missing out on that right now. I don't think there's an offset with foreign trade coming in to Canada, that they're not being required to pay for the carbon that they're producing. So I think we could definitely start to match that, and we should, because otherwise we'll be left behind. But frankly, now that we have a carbon tax, in place, or people are talking about it, I think now we just need to build on that. It's been unfortunate that the Conservative government, decided to argue that in court. We lost a lot of time, and I think provincially we can be doing better with a carbon tax, and I think we have to.
So a lot of previous targets for emissions reductions have focused around electricity generation from the oil and gas sector.
Mm-hmm.
So currently 82% of Canada's electricity is from renewable sources, large majority of that being from hydro. However, renewables only contribute 8% of our total domestic energy production. Does the Green Party have plans to increase sustainability across other sectors, like transport, like manufacturing, etc.?
Yeah. So we'd like to, quote unquote, electrify everything and have a national energy transmission corridor. I think that definitely needs to happen. We definitely need to look at alternative fuels. One thing I've been interested in just recently is this idea of ammonia, which I think is kind of cool. There's a company in Georgetown that is looking at using ammonia as a fuel. I think there's lots of projects that are happening that are just almost there, and they just need that extra incentive from the government to support them actually being able to commercialize. Electric vehicles are huge, but that's not the only way that we're going to address the climate emergency. So again, trains would be another one. We have renewables that we could be implementing more. I was just up in Shelburne this morning and looking at the windmills. They're not hugely popular, but we could do with some more of those in the right areas, strategically.
So Canada and other industrialized nations have contributed far more than their fair share globally of our emissions, compared to some of those smaller nations, especially in the global south and the Pacific, which will end up bearing the brunt of the damage from climate change over the future. What do you believe Canada's personal responsibility is to those nations? Should we be paying to support their green transitions, or otherwise supporting the world globally, since we have historically contributed so much?
Yeah, I think we have to do our part. I think we have contributed enormously to climate damage in South America that largely goes unnoticed. I think we should be the leaders. We shouldn't be the polluters. So we're a very rich nation historically, and I think we need to do our part globally and keep moving forward, rather than this protectionist national stance of not doing anything. That it's a global issue. It's not just a Canadian issue. So climate change has to be addressed globally, and we should be doing our part globally.
Since CITO in 1992, multiple emission targets have been set. So far, they've been repeatedly failed by various governments. We now seem to be in the same position with those set out in 2015 in the Paris Agreement. What emissions targets does the Green Party want to set? And most importantly, how do you plan to meet them better than has been accomplished by previous governments?
So the Green Party is very clear. We need a 60% reduction in emissions, less 2005 levels. The Liberals are asking for 45%. That's not enough. We have 9 years to make our goals, and we really want to be net negative by 2050. So in order to do that, we have to get much more aggressive with our targets. One of the things we are looking at is definitely canceling new pipelines, stop subsidizing pipelines, stop fracking. Those are huge issues. We're exporting a lot of oil, and we need to cut that back. We're very interested in the circular economy and keeping things local. For myself personally, I've been advocating against a 413. There's been moves to have a trucking hub in the southern portion of Caledon. That's exactly the wrong way to go with building another highway. We need transit. We need to have better transit. Fast trains would be an amazing national strategy. That time has come for sure. We're behind, and there's lots of ways that we can start getting to the targets that we need by 2030, but that has to start now.
Yeah. Obviously, there's challenges in Canada because it's such a big, wide country, whereas Europe's a little bit more dense. But even like Japan and China they've done it through large swaths of rural areas, and seen great economic impacts from that, as well as
absolutely
reducing emissions output.
Yeah, exactly. We know that, building more highways just drives more car dependency, which drives up emissions. So we keep doing the same thing like it's 1950, and it's not. It's 2021, and we have a climate emergency. So we definitely have to change the way that we're planning our communities and our cities. We need to respect our prime farmland. Definitely in southern Ontario, we're losing so much farms per day. We have like 5% of farmland left. You cannot grow food on the Canadian Shield, so why do we keep losing prime farmland for these sprawling subdivisions that nobody can afford? That's not going to address the housing emergency. So we need to start looking at missing middle, infill, start building around those communities that already exist, start giving those communities transit, better communities, so that they can actually get to work, within 15 or 20 minutes and not have to hop in the car.
Yeah, so certainly many people I've spoke to in the community have a concern that the Green Party platform might be too aggressive in the economic switch, and that there might be people left behind. And even with the idea of retraining workers, some people will fall through the cracks, and a lot of people are really scared that progress means instability. So what words do you have for, I guess, the workers who feel like, the workers in the automotive industry or the oil and gas industry, who might feel like they're left behind by a more progressive platform?
My answer would be they're being left behind now. We're losing out on research and development in this country. Right now we have a lot of innovators, a lot of really smart people who are trying to look at new ways to move forward in the next 20 years. They get so far and then they reach what's called, in research and development, the valley of death. They cannot bring those ideas to market. And so we need to provide innovations, we need to provide incentives to those innovators so that they can then commercialize on their ideas. And, to the people who say they're worried about the automotive industry, we're not manufacturing anymore in this country, and that needs to change. And I think if we're looking at electric vehicles, that's something that we can bring much more quickly to market in Canada, and we should be doing that. The bottom line is there's a climate emergency. And so we have to act like there's an emergency. We can't wait anymore. We don't have that luxury anymore. So the Netherlands knows this. Many European countries know this. They've been looking towards the future in a much more aggressive way, and we have to get on board with that.
Right. Okay, let's do one kind of Caledon, Dufferin specific question.
Okay.
So a very large portion of Canada, including Ontario, is made up of rural areas. And what does the Green Party specifically have to offer these rural citizens and agriculture producers, which is especially relevant in Dufferin Caledon?
So I think one of the things is respecting prime farmland. That's something I'm a huge advocate for. I think we need to give farmers more incentives to be able to do all of the best sustainable farming practices that they can. Right now, we expect farmers to put food on the table, do it organically, and they're not given enough support to do those things. Constantly there's a push and pull for farmers on whether they rent their land, whether they sell their land and buy land further north so that they're not feeling that pressure of development. There's a constant stress on cash and where that cash comes from for their operations. And so if we're expecting them to be basically the at the forefront of climate change and the climate emergency, then we need to give them better tools so that they can do that. Regenerative farming is a huge thing right now, and in Dufferin Caledon there's a lot of farmers that are doing that, but it's expensive and it's difficult. So they need more tools to help with that. I think another part of this would also be with trade agreements. We have seen it. There's a uptake in milk at the border being brought in from the U.S., and that's really disenfranchising a lot of the dairy farmers in Ontario. I fully support, the Ontario dairy farmers. They have better quality milk, and they don't use certain hormones that we don't want in our milk. And I think as a part of a local economy and a circular economy, we should be giving those dairy farmers the kudos that they need and the props that they need.
So what is the Green Party platform in general on healthcare, and what are your specific views for this community?
So in general, we support pharmacare. So it's very, very important that people are able to afford their medications and not be strapped to buy them. So I've heard that at the door several times during this campaign from young people who have various chronic illness and they need to buy their medications, and it's unaffordable for them. It also is compounded by the fact that it then means they cannot, have any autonomy or move out and be independent. So there's a domino effect when your medication is so crucial and you can't afford it, and now you can't afford the basics. So pharmacare is huge. I've also heard from seniors that, suddenly their eyeglasses are no longer, free. or subsidized. So basic things like dentistry and eye care, these things need to be covered.
Right. Great. As you've said, Canada and largely the world was obviously unprepared for this pandemic and unprepared for the vast economic and medical effects that it would have. So how does the Green Party, or what does the Green Party plan to prepare Canada and also foreign outreach initiatives to protect Canada and the world from the next pandemic?
So I think there's two parts to that. Clearly, we did not have the supplies needed once the pandemic hit. That's the first part. So we should be making our own vaccines, and I think we're on the way to being able to do that. We definitely didn't have our own PPE. We need to be on the way of manufacturing that locally in Canada. I think the larger issue is we did not have the alert in time about the emergency, about the pandemic, because we basically dropped the ball. We didn't send the right people to the World Health Organization in 2017 when they were first, starting to have alarm bells about this pandemic, and it just snowballed from there. And there should have been a national response that was cohesive. I find it disturbing that the Ontario pandemic was very different from the BC pandemic, and we are continuing to not get out of it because there has not been a very clear response from either levels of government.
Mm-hmm. So for many people, vaccine mandates have presented medical and ethical questions of whether it's something that we should do, and there's many people on both sides. And it's become somewhat of a divisive issue regardless of political orientation. So what is the Green Party platform if they have a specific message surrounding mandates? And if you're comfortable, what is your opinion on the topic?
Sure. This has definitely become a very politicized issue in this election. My stance is I am fully vaccinated. My team are fully vaccinated. I think everyone should get the vaccine. That being said, I think there's also an element that needs to be acknowledged about free choice. And the Green Party stance has been that there may be exceptions why someone cannot get the vaccine, and those should be respected. I've met a mother at the door who was nursing, and I know in her position, if it were me, I would not have wanted to get the vaccine until I was absolutely sure that it was the right choice for me. Mm-hmm. I think, we sort of jumped the gun on mandating before we'd actually looked at all the different variables. And we now know, fortunately, the vaccines have been approved fully, and the Pfizer vaccine is fully federally approved. So that takes a lot of the guesswork out for people, and they should be getting the vaccine. I think for their loved ones, they should be getting the vaccine. Mm-hmm. However, when it comes to mandates, if you're not comfortable with that, then you do all the other things. You show up with a mask on, you social distance, you behave like a proper member of society, and you make sure you're taking care of everyone. It's not that your freedoms are being violated. It's just that you're expected to be a civil member of society and do your civic duty. Okay. But, for mandating, no, we don't support the mandate because it hasn't been thought through thoroughly.
Right.
It's become a political weapon, a wedge issue in this election, and I don't think that's appropriate either.
So thank you very much for joining us. If you want to look into the camera and say anything directly to the voters of Dufferin Caledon, go ahead.
So now is the time to vote green. It is the optimistic vote for the future, and I really hope that you will support myself, Jenni Le Forestier, and the Dufferin Caledon Green Party in the 2021 election.